For the first presentation, I call upon Professor Narendra Mohan, Director, National Sugar Institute, Kanpur, for his presentation on Bio-Ethanol and Indian sugar industry. Welcome, Professor Narendra Mohan, sir. You have 20 minutes for presentation and 5 minutes for question and answer session. Welcome,
Thank
sir.
you. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Raskar, and giving me this opportunity to express my views, particularly on syrup diversion. As we look forward for boosting the ethanol production, we are talking about ethanol from quite some time now, and ethanol is very important for all of us, particularly who belong to the sugar industry. We are talking ethanol a lot. Hopefully, my presentation is not going to be that technical. It is going to be a general presentation once I am talking about how we can boost up the ethanol production in the country, particularly through the syrup route. I'm going to share my presentation before you. So nothing more I have to say. The broad outline of the presentation is before you. Introduction, it is all customary. Importance of ethanol and present status. These are the two aspects we are talking about, and I am not going to stress more on these 2 points because all of us are aware. So I'm going to skip and I'm going to talk a little about the 2 aspects which I have enumerated in the introductory part. I'm going to talk specifically on opportunities and challenges because like Cogen, we are being carried away and we are talking a lot on ethanol as ethanol to be the savior of the Indian sugar industry, but there are going to be challenges in times to come. So what are the opportunities and what are the challenges? Because I am very keen, I'm optimistic, and I'm not going to be talk anything which is not there. I have to be cautious. I have to weigh ethanol correctly, how it is going to help the sugar industry and what are the challenges which we are going to face. There are several models of the syrup diversion. As a whole, we are talking about various models, various feedstocks from the sugar industry, and we are also talking about now about the rice and the maize. So what model is the best suited model and what are the challenges which we are facing while we are diverting the syrup? I got the chance, to visit many units which are diverting, which have undertaken the diversion of the syrup in Maharashtra or in Uttar Pradesh, even in the Telangana region. So what actually is happening? Because we are talking about syrup diversion, unfortunately, the people are not sharing the data. This is one reason why we are not improving to a certain extent, because everybody is talking about, yes, we are diverting the syrup and we are not having the issues. But once you visit the ethanol unit, yes, there are challenges and they are having the problems. Because one thing for sure, whenever you divert any B heavy or you divert syrup, you talk about the capacity expansion. Unfortunately, to many ethanol units which I visited, none of the unit was in a position to even cope up with the ethanol plant capacity which has been there for the C heavy. So what to talk about escalation in the ethanol plant capacity by 20-25%? They were not in a position even to cope up with the capacity which is earmarked for the C heavy production. So that was the state of affair. There were challenges. There are challenges with different type of the syrups also, which I'm going to talk about. So this is all about why we are talking about ethanol, because for us, for the people in the sugar industry, it is the tool for balancing the sugar production. You can have better liquidity, you can have stable sugar prices, you can talk blah blah blah, so many things. And if you talk about nation as a whole, you can talk about, again, you can talk about many benefits of the ethanol, from clean green energy, foreign exchange, energy security. And today, once we are talking about Russia attacking Ukraine and crude oil prices being ruling at $103 per barrel, so ethanol is going to be a important fuel again, and sugar industry is going to be the contributor to cope up with the requirements in time to come. Sugar production, as we are talking, and again, this production, so important for the sugar have more ethanol, because we want more ethanol, less ocean, through which we can encounter the economic sustainability and the environmental sustainability as well. Ethanol demand projections, you all know, by 2025-26, we need 1,000 crore liters of the ethanol. And then how much it is going to come from molasses and how much may be challenged, but tomorrow it may not be the feedstocks. So we are talking about sacrificing sugar, from where, you know, the feedstock will come. Particular problem is going to be there for the standalone units, because once every sugar factory is going to have an integrated sort of ethanol unit, they are not going to sell their molasses. If at all they are going to sell their molasses, the prices of the molasses will go up, and then you will talk about the ethanol prices, because the prices will become unremunerative. You will not be in a position to supply the ethanol because the cost of production will be much higher. But as on date, we look forward for 1,000 crore liters of the ethanol, maybe from the grains, maybe from the feedstocks from the sugar industry. Fortunately, sugar industry is now, they can have a pat on their back, because we have achieved 8.1% of the blending during the last ethanol supply year. And this year, till 13th of February, we have achieved, we have supplied, the sugar industry has supplied around 73 crore odd liters of the ethanol to the ethanol blending program. So hopefully we are targeting, we are going to have around 10% of the blending during the current ethanol supply year. Now coming to, multiple advantages, this all, we are talking, once sitting in the government, we are looking the various phases of the ethanol production, the income of the farmers, because you are benefiting the farmers, not carrying the, the loads of the cane areas. You are benefiting the paddy farmers, maize farmers. Domestic sugar industry is getting benefited because you are having better liquidity. A lot of investments are coming up because you are situated in the rural area. So you are creating jobs. You are coming out with the investments of more than 40,000 crores. Environmental issues you are addressing. And, the tagline today, we are talking about the Atmanirbhar Bharat. So you are going to reduce the oil import bill to the extent of 30,000 crores or more. Sometimes my friends, they talk about the prices of the ethanol, and they say, the prices of the ethanol which are ruling in the country are not, as per their wishes or as per their demand. To the ethanol prices regime which is ruling in USA, Brazil, and Thailand, you are comfortable. As you can see, the X-mill ethanol prices I have derived for the sugarcane, B molasses, or the C molasses. You may talk about the higher sugarcane prices which you pay. But as a whole, if you look into the scenario, you are the only country which is having the differential pricing policy for the ethanol. Now, this is the the generalized part of the presentation. Now, if you look into the options for the sugar units, you do have multiple options now, depending upon the relative economics, whether you have to produce sugar or you have to produce ethanol, or you have to have a blend of the two. Important is how much sugar you want to sacrifice, how you want to balance the sugar production, how you want to have more ethanol. There may be conventional method where you are diverting the C-heavy molasses. You can have the B-heavy diversion molasses, which is the option number 2, or you can have, the another option where you are having the 100% diversion of the sugarcane juice. I will come to that, because today we are going to talk about the syrup. Then you can have the partial diversion of the syrup and B-heavy diversion, which is now taking place. And I have seen many sugar units have gone for the partial diversion of the syrup, meaning thereby they are running their ethanol units on partially diverted syrup during the season of the sugar factory, storing the B-heavy molasses for running the ethanol unit during the off season. Or you can have another option, which is the running your running your ethanol units on partially diverted syrup, storing C-heavy molasses. So sort of conventional, but diverting a part of the syrup for production of the ethanol. Or you can have a dual feedstock. So my options today are very clear. If I talk specifically about the feedstocks from the sugar industry, either you divert 100% of the syrup, or you divert syrup partially for running your ethanol unit during the season, and store your B-heavy molasses for running your units during the off season. Or the third option will be partial diversion of the syrup during the season to cope up with your requirements, and store the C-heavy molasses. Now, there may be challenges, there may be factors which are influencing the models of the diversion. Because particularly if I talk about 100% of the diversion of the syrup, you have to look into the capacity of the distillery which is attached to the sugar unit. So you have to look into the capacity of the sugar plant and the attached distillery, availability of the sugar cane and other sugar house feedstocks, other raw materials, and the relative economics. So first and the last, these two factors are very important. What is the capacity of the sugar plant and the capacity of the attached distillery and the relative economics? Because in the end, you are going to, calculate the total revenues coming from sugar, revenues coming from sugar and ethanol. So then you are going to have a balance sheet, which one is the most fruitful and lucrative. So I'm going to talk about only three diversions, which I have understood. Option number one, I have not seen actually, but theoretically we are talking about 100% diversion of the sugarcane juice or syrup, but it has got a challenge. The major challenge is, how you are going to cope up with 100% diversion, because by any stretch of imagination, you need a very, high capacity of the ethanol plant to cope up with the requirement. Even for a 3,500 TCD plant, you need a capacity which is very high. Or for 2,500, you are talking about a 200 KL distillery. So you have to look into the the capacity investments and everything. And the second challenge will come. Okay, you divert your 100% you go ahead with the 100% diversion of the cane juice or the syrup. But what you will do during the off season? Because you are not going to be Atmanirbhar. Today, we are going to talk about the ethanol units which are self-sustainable, which can have their own feedstocks, which are not going to be dependent upon, the feedstocks from the market or feedstock from other sources. If you yourself is a standalone sort of unit, how you will run your ethanol unit during the off season, because you have diverted your sugarcane juice to cope up with the requirement, 100% diverted. There is no molasses, there is nothing. So this is a major challenge. If you are going for 100% diversion, you need very high capacity of the ethanol plant. You need feedstock for off-season operations, and then you have to look into the economics. Side by side, you have to go ahead with the major changes in the sugar plant to how you are going to make a balance of the fuel, steam, and power. So now number two comes into the picture, where you are talking about Atmanirbhar ethanol unit. You divert your syrup during the season, you run your ethanol unit on the syrup which has been diverted from the sugar factory, and during the off season, you run your unit on B-heavy molasses which you have stored during the season of the sugar factory. You need few changes, because ultimately, because you are diverting the syrup, so you have to make certain changes. You are not boiling C cascade, you have to do certain changes because your breeding has been affected. So certain changes are required at the evaporators, crystallization and curing stations also, because you are not boiling the C cascade. Certain other balancing of the equipments, because you are having lower quantities of the syrup. There may be certain additional requirements of the funds also, because you are going to have some B-heavy molasses storage capacity creations, because ultimately your B-heavy quantities will be much more than the C-heavy quantities. Not talking about the 4.5% or 4.25%, but talking about 6% or 6.2 or even more. But the total, if you look into the total integrated complex, you are talking about sugar factory, you are talking about ethanol unit, you are talking about a blend of two. Your ethanol unit is self-sustainable, which is having the feedstock for round the year operation. It has got a better economics, which if you calculate will be comparable with the B-heavy molasses diversion. But compared with the B-heavy molasses diversion, it has got an added advantage. Since you are diverting B-heavy also and you are diverting syrup also, you are sacrificing more quantity of the sugar. So it will reduce the total availability of the sugar in the market, and you will have a better demand supply position of the sugar, hence stable and better prices. Option number third may be, partial diversion of the syrup and diversion of the C-heavy molasses. Again, the salient features will remain same, but you are not going to make any changes at the crystallization and centrifugation stages, because ultimately you are going to boil the C-heavy molasses. But if you compare partial diversion of the syrup and C-heavy molasses with partial diversion of syrup and B-heavy molasses, in this case, since you are not diverting B-heavy molasses, you are not sacrificing that much quantity of the sugar as you could have done during the case of the B-heavy molasses diversion. So other option may be, the partial diversion of the syrup and the C-heavy molasses. So the last two options, B heavy diversion and partial diversion of the syrup, or partial diversion of the syrup and diversion of the C heavy molasses. To the best of my understanding, these two options are workable and we are going ahead. Many sugar factories have taken up. Now, even with this, we do have certain challenges, as I have observed after visiting some of the ethanol plant sugar factories, and even I got a chance to see the Javan sugars also, where the people are talking about the bio syrup. One thing, for talking about the syrup, making ethanol, is how you are, coping up with your fermentation process, because I've seen there are issues, because syrup is a very clean substrate and you need nutrients, because you need some food for the yeast also. So the demand or the requirement of the nutrient and optimization of nutrient is a challenge. As the President STI was talking about, you need properly trained manpower to cope up with the requirement of diversion of the syrup for making ethanol. Simply talking about diverting syrup and making ethanol, theoretically, it sounds good. But there are challenges, because it is not like C heavy, it is not like B heavy. It is a clear, clean substrate where the nutrients you have to provide from outside, and you have to do something with your fermentation technique as well. On the basis of my visit to many, ethanol units, I have seen this is a challenge. The people are they are going ahead with the trial and error method to optimize the dose of the nutrients. But there are challenges and the people have to work on that. And we need to train the people to we can have the proper fermentation efficiency. Because one thing more was there, as I was talking about, you are not getting the required escalation in the capacity, and the deterrent is high retention time in fermentation. The people who are processing the syrup from the sulfitation units, they are having the retention type of 55, 58 or more hours. So if you are going to have the retention type in fermentation for 50 hours, 55 hours, or 58 hours, how you can talk about escalation in the capacity with the same, infrastructure? So this is a challenge at the fermentation station itself. The people, they have gone ahead with certain, changes, optimization of the nutrients, even, with the recirculation of the spent wash. But this is a challenge till now, how to reduce the time at the fermentation station. Merely putting another, fermenter is not going to work upon. It is like if you do have the higher steam consumption, increase the capacity of the boiler. So that this is not the, the thing which we want. We want steam consumption to go down. So similarly, if you want, to cope up with the capacity, you want a higher capacity, you have to see that you do have the optimum fermentation time. I'm not a subject specialist for fermentation or distillation, but this is my observation, and the, learned panelists are there who can speak better than me how to, circumvent this problem of higher retention time or the time required for the fermentation. One thing more which, President STI has touched about the low solid content in the spent wash. I've seen, the people who are diverting syrup and going ahead with the ethanol production, they are having this challenge again. In spite of, diverting or recirculating spent wash to the extent of 20%, 30%, talking about 40% or even more, there are issues at the evaporators, multiple effect evaporators, and how to concentrate it. People are having challenges. The people have tried to, to recirculate it again to ME, but then they are having the challenges of higher scaling of the ME. So this is another area after fermentation where we do have the problem. Since the solid content is less, I'm going to finish within 2-3 minutes. High requirement of the support fuel. Now the people who are having the incineration boilers, who are working on coal as a support fuel, and the prices of the coal have gone up, you have to look into what cost of production you are going to have, because you do not have the, the support fuel like bagasse. And even in the case of the bagasse, how much support fuel you are having? We used to talk about 70% of the slop, 30% of the bagasse, or 75% of the slop, or 25% of the bagasse. Now we are talking about 80% of the support fuel and 20% of the slop. So this is, an area which is to be, looked into. There are difficulties, as I have already spoken, in achieving the capacity enhancement even after recirculation of the spent wash. Issues with utilization of the vapors from the evaporator. This is happening in sugar at the end of the sugar factories, where because you are diverting the syrup, you are having the low mascate percent cane, and if you are diverting your B heavy molasses, what to do with the vapors? Because ultimately you have to concentrate your syrup. The X quantity of the syrup is to be concentrated to 55 or 60-degree Brix. So vapors are to be generated and vapors are bound to be generated, but you cannot consume because you have partially diverted the syrup and you are not having any C mascate boiling. I have seen factories. I got a chance almost a week back to visit one of the sugar factory where the vapors are being blown into the atmosphere. So this is to be seen at the end of the sugar unit, because we have to look distillery and sugar factory as a combined unit, not as a segregated unit. There are many other challenges because the syrup being containing a lot of sugars. So how we can have the lower contamination, or how we can prevent the contamination of the syrup. The chemical control, because this is important, how much you are diverting and how much you are having for the sugar factory from the point of view of the chemical control. So these are the few challenges which I have seen, from fermentation to distillation to the slop generation and handling of the slops. And problem is more acute, to the best of my understanding, in the syrup which we receive from the sulfitation unit to those from the defecation units. Meaning thereby, if we have the defecate syrup from the defecation units, the problems in fermentation are less as compared to the syrup which we are having from the sulfitation units, requiring much higher retention time, and the issues that reaction is still not complete going on. Coming to the challenges in overall ethanol production, I'm not going to speak much, but a word of caution. The word of caution is the relative economics of sugar and ethanol production. And to me, which is very important, and I am stressing on that very loud and clear, we are talking about CNG, LPG, and electric vehicles. The go electric policy of the government, every now and then it hits the newspaper that within 6 months, we are going to have electric vehicles. By 2030, we are going to replace all the vehicles with the electric vehicles. Then where the ethanol will go? We are talking about n numbers of the option. We are talking about green hydrogen. We are talking about some more, So we have to look into, today we generate the capacity. We may talk about many feedstocks from the sugar industry where this ethanol is going to be consumed. So please keep a watch on the market dynamics and how different policies are coming up in the market. There are the sections of the newspaper. I was going through many newspapers, and there were interesting discussions on two more things. One is ethanol policy. They were criticizing, and they are criticizing the ethanol policy like anything, because you are talking about ethanol from two sources, one from the sugarcane and another from the rice, and both these crops are tagged as a water guzzler crop. So what you are doing with the environment, you are talking about a green fuel. On the other hand, you are going to promote two crops, rice and sugarcane, which are considered as the water guzzler crop, and you are just doing some nonsense with your environment and natural resources. Then, recently I came across one more newspaper where the paper was talking, it was opening a debate on food versus fuel while utilizing rice and maize for ethanol production. Because, recently the Global Hunger Index 2020 was announced, and India is ranked 101 out of 116 countries. So tomorrow, not today, but tomorrow, the people can create a sort of debate on food versus fuel, keeping in view the India's ranking on the Global Hunger Index. So to conclude with the production of bioethanol, as we always say, it is a savior of the sugar industry. And even today we are talking about more and more sugar to be diverted for making ethanol. This is the only way at present to, balance the demand supply position of the sugar in the country, and the prices of ethanol being remunerative because the government is trying to, give you prices to make your units sustainable today and for few years from now. I hope it will continue, but for few years from now, it is going to work upon as an important, product from the sugar industry as a whole. So ethanol is important, but we have to keep a watch on market trends regarding advent of the electric and CNG driven vehicles in particular, and drawing the roadmap accordingly, because we have seen the fate of the generation, I reiterate. So this is to be seen. Under the current situation, production of bioethanol by sacrificing sugar is in the interest of everybody, all the stakeholders of the sugar industry and country as a whole. But to the best of my understanding, we have to look for developing various business models, not merely talking about and being carried away since he is diverting the B heavy or he is diverting partial quantities of the syrup and C heavy. So I should also do, keeping in view the different agroclimatic conditions, the rates of the the sugarcane which are there in various states, sugarcane producing states, because somewhere you are paying the FRP, somewhere you are having SAPs, and SAPs are also differing, and the quantities of the ethanol which you can get from the sugarcane are also differing. So you have to develop your own business model, keeping in view all these factors which are there, and then you can have smart distilleries in times to come. But for the syrup, before I conclude, syrup is still, to my understanding, is a sort of challenge, and we have to optimize the conditions for processing the syrup at the fermentation stage, and how we can cope up with the requirement of the support fuel, because the solid content, and how you are going to work with your MEs. So this whole is to be looked into. Unless you do something good with your fermentation, you are not going to increase your capacities of the ethanol units, because the time of the fermentation is too high. So this is on the basis of my observations to various sugar factories and the sort of integrated ethanol units in many states. And bio-syrup, yes, bio-syrup, I have also have gone through the, not to the trials, but I've gone through the results, and I've seen the modus operandi of the bio-syrup. There were certain issues which I flagged, and I happened to be at the Praj office also to flag all those issues. 2 months have passed, but I have not got any feedback from that, because I was just wondering, because it was a straight line, there was no change in the TRS content over a period of time. So I was just wondering whether I can have the same kind of the situation everywhere. There is absolutely no change in the TRS from day 1 to day X. That was really nice to see, no change in the TRS almost. And still I'm waiting from the Praj, if they are on some platform, they can get back me with my queries. So thanks a lot, President at STI as a whole, and my members of STI, for giving me this chance to present my views, my observations, which I gathered during the passage of the time. And I hope we are going to have more and more diversion of the syrup, but with a caution that we have to have the competent manpower, the duly trained manpower, I should say, duly trained manpower to cope up with the challenges which we have for making ethanol from the syrup. Thank you. Jai Hind.
In chat box, I think there is no question, because I think your presentation is self-explanatory.